Another day, another video. Today is Hell's Paradise. I think this is the best shonen style comic I've read so far. It's probably not really shonen. This is probably a seinen comic. Comics with a male audience in mind. Comics where the main character is like a samurai or fighter or some sort of action person. I feel like this has been my favorite so far. We have our main character, Gabimaru. He is, as far as I can tell, completely invulnerable to damage, completely unkillable. And we have Sagiri, who is this female fighter who's been trained to carry out assassinations and beheadings, and is possibly the only person or one of the only people who's able to dispatch Gabimaru. Gabimaru is a criminal, an assassin, a killer, a ninja, and he is tasked by the Shogun, along with a number of other criminals, to go to this mysterious island where the Shogun believes the elixir for immortality resides. But it's also a place of unknown danger. Every expedition they've sent up to this point has come back with either just body parts returning, or in some cases, people who have plants growing all over their bodies and who are muttering gibberish. So it's clearly a deadly place. It's clearly a crazy place. And so they decided this next expedition is going to be all the criminals who they don't really care about. And if they can succeed in finding the elixir, then they get their crimes forgiven. I feel like the first two chapters of the manga were the strongest. The first introduces us to Gabimaru as initially a cold and unfeeling character who just doesn't seem to care about anything. This was a little taxing to start. I was really hoping that there was more to this character. He's also like hyper competent, super strong fighter and world-renowned ninja, very infamous person. And so I was kind of getting Toriko vibes, where you follow a character who's already like the top person of the world. But thankfully that first chapter does give some more depth to the character. I was really surprised at one point for an artistic choice, because when it first happened, I thought it was really weird. And then there's a reveal a little bit further on that makes the artistic choice make sense and was actually really poignant. And so I was really happy to see not only were my initial expectations of this character reversed, but also my initial understanding of this weird artistic choice was reversed. And so that was fun, and I liked that. And I was behind Gabimaru as a character, and with his arc, like the thing that he is trying to achieve on a personal level. The second chapter focused on Sagiri, gave her backstory, some really odd choices with her chapter. In particular, a bunch of nudity that did not need to be there, served no purpose. It did not add anything to the story. I believe, again, its inclusion definitely makes me feel like this is meant for an adult audience. But it also just seemed to serve no purpose. So it was really weird and really off-putting, because there was nudity, but also what was going on at the time was very violent and very creepy and graphic. Moving forward from those first two chapters, we start getting a little bit more issues with the comic. The writing takes a little bit of a dive when we have these characters talking to Sagiri about how she's a woman and women should just be, at home, and like minding the homestead. I can separate the feelings of the characters from the feelings of the author, because clearly the author wants to show that Sagiri is just as capable as a man, and that is part of her arc and part of her story, that she's trying to prove that she's capable. But I just didn't need another scene. Like, that was already covered in her backstory. I didn't need another scene. I don't need every man that she comes across to belittle her for me to get the point. And so, because it felt like it was kind of beating that idea over the reader's head, that was a little bit of a detriment to it. We have Gabimaru's goal, and we have Sagiri's goal, and they intertwine in a certain way. And while initially that was fine, they're fighting one another at one point in the book, and they're having this like deep philosophical conversation, this very like esoteric back and forth about their motivations, and it just read as like way too purple of prose. I feel like it's trying to be super deep, and it doesn't come off that way. The intersection of the things that they want to accomplish still works, and I can see how they're playing off of each other, but the way they talk about it is just so overblown and so overwrought that it really took me out of the story, and it really took me out of the action in that scene. Hopefully, since we've kind of had that out and they kind of throw everything out there, we have less of that in the future. It's not that I'm against deeper ideas within a story. That's not the problem. Again, the problem is the way they go about explaining it. I gave characters a 10 because in isolation, the characters are great. I love the characters that they bring in later that are these other antagonist characters, and they all have some sort of label and some sort of like thing that makes them unique that I think will be fun down the line. For plot, I gave it an 8 out of 10. It really reminded me of the film Annihilation, with the area they're going into that's unexplored and clearly very dangerous. Setting a 9, again, the mysterious island they're going to, the beautiful, like the mixture of the beauty and the danger was very cool. Art and writing is where I decided to ding it for the over-the-top philosophical conversation. It really dragged down the action. It really felt... It's not that it felt out of nowhere, because Sagiri has, throughout the entire comic, kind of had these internal monologues about the way that she and Gabimaru are similar. So it wasn't like without precedent, but it did go on for a little too long at the end. Intrigue, I gave it 9. So I'm very much interested in this island and its crazy inhabitants, and whether or not they're going to find anything, where the plot's going to go from here. Relationships is another one where I dinged it. I gave it a 6. Again, because a lot of the complaints I have with the title are when characters start interacting with each other. Overall enjoyment was an 8. Certainly, depending on how the story develops, it could be great. Overall, this scores a 57 in the Cawpile method, which would be the equivalent of an 8 out of 10, which feels about right. This is going up against Is It Wrong to Pick Up Girls in the Dungeon? That's going to be my next read. I'll come back with the thoughts on that, and we'll see what moves on to the next round. So the eagle-eyed among you might have noticed that I wasn't actually reading Is It Wrong to Pick Up Girls in a Dungeon, but rather Is It Wrong to Pick Up Girls in a Dungeon 2? And so that has been rectified, which was quite the challenge, actually, because it turns out that this is a expansive series with several offshoots. But I have the real Is It Wrong to Pick Up Girls in a Dungeon #1. The issue has been rectified, and I will begin getting this done soon. So I will say, I am glad that I went back and I picked up the right Volume 1. It did make a lot more sense than jumping into the Part 2, Is It Wrong to Pick Up Girls in a Dungeon? It still wasn't good, but it was better than starting in the middle of things. Let's talk about this comic real quick. This follows Belle, who is an adventurer in the only city in the world that has a dungeon. He gains his strength apparently by going after what he wants, and so one day he's down in the dungeon and this other character, Eyes Wallenstein shows up, and she's this badass fighter woman, and Belle immediately falls in love with her because anyway. So he starts getting much stronger, much quicker, and then we kind of get a sense of how this world works. So this is a world where I feel like we took a lot of shortcuts to make it a very by-the-numbers generic fantasy world, ultimately. I've already mentioned how there's only the one dungeon in the world. We also are told that above that dungeon is a special site, so if any of the monsters get out of there, they immediately die, I think, so they can't escape. The dungeon also creates the monsters that are down there, which when I first read it, I thought that at least gave some reason why people would be going down there hunting them, but then they can't escape, so not quite sure what the point is. In the wider world, we have gods and goddesses that have come down because they have become bored with their lives, and that sounds kind of cool, but all they really do is set up families, guilds essentially, and then they go to parties where they squabble about each other's boobs. So yeah, that's what we're doing with that premise. Go through my call pile descriptions here real quick and just give a brief overview of how I feel about these different points. So for characters, I gave it a 4. I felt like there were too many characters introduced for this one volume, and that they're all paper thin. They might as well just be their job descriptions. A number of them, I think, are supposed to be love interests of a sort for Belle, but he's so oblivious to that fact that it's a non-issue, which is something I'll bring up later. The setting, I gave a 5. Again, I feel like it's very middle-of-the-road fantasy for the way that it is, the world building. The way the world building has been set up is very by the numbers. The interesting parts of it, we don't do anything with, so that's disappointing. The art and writing, I don't feel like the art was great. The action scenes were fun, so that was a positive. I liked the parts where Belle was actually down in the dungeon and trying to fight through the monsters. That was kind of cool. But we have lines like, "Even my heart was blushing." And ostensibly, I think this is meant to be a romance. You gotta up your game with your flowery language if you're going to be having these characters talk about falling in love. The plot, I gave a 3. I'm not sure what the plot of this first volume was supposed to be. Not a whole lot happens. Belle sees Eyes one time and falls in love with her. He goes around lamenting the fact that he can't be with her for some reason. He goes and fights in a dungeon. Goddess goes to a party and gets into a tiff with another goddess for several pages, and then begs a third goddess to forge her a knife for Belle, and then she does it. So there's not any real conflict. Only toward the very end do we start getting a hint at some sort of conflict about to happen, with Freya doing something at this monster taming competition. Intrigue I gave a 4, again, because there was no conflict, there was no mystery. Everything that was kind of mysterious was explained to you pretty much at face value directly. And then at the very end we had the thing with Freya, which was, again, at least somewhat interesting, but a little too late. Overall enjoyment, I said it was a 5. It was fine. I don't hate it. It was not offensive, but I found it kind of lazy. I found it uninteresting. There wasn't a whole lot going for it. I'm sure there are fans of this out there, and I apologize. It's just not for me. It reminded me quite a bit of Sword Art Online, which was also very popular for a time, and I was not on board with that either. The one thing I wrote here is that Freya should release the monsters. Freya should release the monsters and at least, get a plot going, get something happening in this story, because this was not it. I do not see what the point of this was, other than a very long exposition for this story. It gets a 30 from me as a raw score for the Caw pile, which would equate to about a 4.28 out of 10. It got nowhere close to Hell's Paradise. I have my issues with Hell's Paradise and its writing as well, but at least for most of it, I was intrigued by the world building. I was intrigued by the characters and the story. This had very little going for it, and it's unfortunate. I'll be honest, I wasn't expecting Is It Wrong to Pick Up Girls in a Dungeon to be like my number one pick, but I did think that it would be more fun than it was. I thought it would give me like Tenchi Muyo vibes from back in high school, but it just didn't do enough in this first volume to get me invested in anything that was going on. So, unfortunate, but I would not continue the series unless I had a friend that was specifically wanting me to read it. Again, I wasn't mad about it. It wasn't offensive. I see the potential for it becoming offensive, but at the point that I read, it was not. And so it's not that I have anything against reading it. It's just there's so much else better out there and more what I would consider worth my time that I'm not going to pick up any more volumes of this one. So, all right. So that ends, what is it? Round, this is match 5. So we're in round 1, match 5. Hell's Paradise is moving on, and it's going to face off against whatever wins between Beastars and Goblin Slayer. So, going to start those up tomorrow, and I'll be back with my thoughts on those very soon. I hope your reading journey is going well. I hope you are enjoying this breakdown of different comics and these different verses. I feel like it's worked out pretty well that we've had a fairly strong comic in each match and then one that I didn't care for as much, which means that the next rounds are going to get much more interesting because it's going to be titles that are much stronger going up against each other. So that'll be fun. Please like, comment, subscribe. Tell me how wrong I am about Is It Wrong to Pick Up Girls in a Dungeon? Just let me know down below what your thoughts are, if you've read these comics, and if you have any suggestions for a future manga tournament. I am interested in hearing them. I'm having so much fun going through and doing this that I would definitely do it again. So that's all for me today. Until the next one, take care.